Did you hear that? What is going on? Is the senator safe?
Some betrayals cut deep, but they serve as a reminder of who we are. Tonight, we move forward together into a new era.
How could he? The poor woman, and pregnant too! This is a disgrace.
The glass hit the floor before anyone could breathe. A champagne flute, crystal, expensive, the kind that cost more than most people's rent. It shattered at the feet of 200 of Seoul's most powerful people, businessmen, senators, crime lords dressed in tailored silk, and every single head in that ballroom turned toward the sound, every head except hers. Adaeze Okafor-Shin stood perfectly still in the third row, her deep bronze skin glowing under the chandelier light, her black gown cut with the kind of quiet elegance that didn't scream money. It simply was money. She had one hand resting lightly on the back of a gold chair. The other rested on the small shoulder of her 7-year-old daughter, Nari, who was already looking up at her mother with wide, searching eyes. On the stage, at the marble podium draped in white orchids, her husband stood, Shin Junho, the most feared man in Korea's underground empire. 41 years old, jaw sharp enough to cut stone, presence so commanding that rooms quieted when he entered. He was wearing the Brioni suit she had picked out for him last month. She remembered holding it against his chest in the boutique, laughing, telling him gray made him look distinguished. He hadn't told her he was bringing someone else tonight. He hadn't told her anything. Ladies and gentlemen, Junho's voice carried across the ballroom, smooth and controlled, the way it always was. The voice of a man who had never once begged for anything. I have an announcement that affects the future of the Shin Empire. Adaeze's fingers tightened slightly on Nari's shoulder. I would like to formally introduce to you all. He paused, turned, extended one hand to the side of the stage. The woman who will stand beside me as my wife. A woman stepped forward. Park Seo-yeon. She was beautiful in the way that had been specifically engineered to fit into this world. Pale, polished, dressed in ivory, with a soft round belly that pushed gently against the fabric of her dress. Pregnant, visibly, undeniably pregnant. The room erupted, whispers, gasps. Somewhere behind Adaeze, a woman made a sound like a swallowed scream, and Junho, her husband, the man she had loved for 9 years, the man whose tears she had held in her palms when his father died, the man who had kissed her forehead every single morning for the first 4 years of their marriage. Junho placed his hand over Seo-yeon's and smiled. Adaeze didn't move. She felt 200 pairs of eyes swing toward her like searchlights. She felt the cameras on the journalist near the back. She felt Nari's small hand find hers and squeeze, and she felt absolutely nothing. Not because she didn't care, but because in that moment something inside her made a decision so clean and so final that emotion had no room left to live. She exhaled once, slowly. Then she crouched down to Nari's level, smoothed the tiny ribbon on her daughter's dress, tucked a curl behind her ear, and whispered something that made the little girl nod seriously. Then Adaeze Okafor-Shin stood up, turned around, and walked out of that ballroom with her back straight, her chin level, and her heels hitting the marble floor in perfect, unhurried rhythm. She did not look back, not once. Junho watched her go, and for the first time that evening something crossed his face that wasn't confidence. It looked almost like fear. Because he knew his wife, he knew that tears would have meant she was broken, screaming would have meant she was desperate. But silence? That kind of silence meant she was already 3 steps ahead of everyone in the room. What nobody in that ballroom knew, not the senators, not the crime lords, not even Junho himself, was that the empire they were all gathered to protect legally belonged to her. Welcome to Afrok Love Tales. If someone publicly humiliated you like this in front of the whole world, would you walk away with your dignity, or would you burn everything down? Drop your answer in the comments right now, and if you're new here, subscribe and hit that notification bell, because what this woman does next is going to leave you speechless. How they fell in love 5 years earlier, Seoul, October, the kind of cold that sharpens everything. Adaeze had not come to Korea to fall in love. She had come for 6 weeks. A consulting contract with a mid-sized logistics firm that needed someone to restructure their Asian supply chain before it collapsed under its own inefficiency. She was 29. She had her MBA from Oxford. She had already saved 2 companies in Lagos and 1 in Nairobi, and she had a flight back to London booked for the 14th of November. She was not supposed to be there long enough to feel anything. The boardroom was all glass and cold light, 40 floors above the Han River. 12 Korean executives sat around a black table, most of them trying not to stare too obviously at the woman who had just walked in with a red leather portfolio and zero apology for being the youngest and the only African person in the room. Shin Junho sat at the head of the table. He wasn't supposed to be at that meeting. He had a 3% stake in the firm as a silent partner, and silent partners didn't attend restructuring presentations. But someone had told him about the consultant from Lagos, and Junho had always been curious in the way that dangerous men are curious, quietly, hungrily, from a distance. Adaeze opened her presentation without greeting anyone. "Your distribution model," she said, setting her portfolio on the table, "is bleeding 42 million won per quarter, and 3 people in this room know exactly why and have been pretending not to." The room went very still. She clicked to the first slide. Numbers. Clean, precise, devastating. "The Busan route is being double invoiced through a shell subsidiary that your CFO registered under his wife's maiden name. I found it in your Q2 audit in about 40 minutes. She looked directly at the CFO. "Do you want to address that now, or should I keep going?" The CFO's face went the color of ash. Junho leaned back in his chair slowly, and for the first time in a very long time, he smiled. After the meeting, after the CFO had been removed and 3 board members had excused themselves to make panicked phone calls, Junho was waiting in the corridor outside the boardroom, leaning against the wall with his jacket open and his arms folded like a man who had nowhere more important to be. "You knew about the Busan route before you walked in," he said. Adaeze didn't slow down. "Of course I did. Then why not lead with it?" "Because I needed to see how long they'd let it go on before someone spoke up." She glanced at him sideways. "No one did, including you." He fell into step beside her. "I'm a silent partner. You're Shin Junho. You're never actually silent." He laughed. A real one. It surprised both of them. That night he took her to a pojang matcha near the river, the kind of tent stall that had no business existing in the neighborhood of a man like him, and they ate tteokbokki in paper cups and argued about trade corridors for 3 hours. She corrected him twice. He let her, which was not something he did with anyone. It rained on the walk back. He gave her his jacket without asking. She wore it without arguing, which she told him later was the closest she came to admitting she liked him. The late nights became a pattern, his driver waiting outside her hotel at 10, 11 midnight. A message that just said conference room, floor 24, and she would arrive to find him standing at the window with 2 cups of coffee, already deep in some problem he wanted her mind on. She told him once that she wasn't his employee. He said he knew. She came anyway. He showed up at her hotel lobby in the rain one Thursday with no excuse and no explanation. Just stood there, soaked, looking at her like she was the answer to a question he hadn't known he was asking. "Your meeting with Daewoo is tomorrow," she said. "I know." "You should be sleeping." "I know that too." She let him in. They talked until 4 in the morning. He fell asleep on her couch. She put a blanket over him and stood there for a moment longer than she needed to, looking at this powerful, complicated, surprisingly gentle man sleeping in her hotel room with his shoes still on. She was in trouble. She knew it. The proposal came on a Tuesday in her last week in Seoul, not in a restaurant, not in a ballroom. In the conference room where it had all started, floor 40, Han River below, the city lit up like 1,000 promises. He had cleared the room, dimmed the lights slightly, and when she walked in, there was nothing on the table except a single ring box and him, standing there looking more nervous than she had ever seen him.
"Stay," he said. Just that. No speech. "Junho, I know it's not what you planned. I know you have London and Lagos and 12 other cities that need you. He opened the box. Stay anyway. She looked at him for a long time. You're going to be very difficult to be married to, she said finally. Probably. I'm not giving up my work. I never asked you to. She looked at the ring, then back at him. Okay, she said. He exhaled like a man who had been holding his breath for 2 months. They were genuinely, completely, embarrassingly in love. The kind that made his staff exchange glances when she called and he smiled at his phone in the middle of meetings. The kind that made her, who had never been soft with anyone, reach for his hand in public without thinking. He was different with her, quieter, more honest, softer at the edges. She was the only person he had ever allowed to disagree with him and walk away unscathed. She thought she had married a powerful man. She had not yet understood that she had married a family. She thought she married him. She didn't realize she'd have to fight his entire bloodline just to keep what she'd built. Stay with us. This story is only getting started. The marriage starts breaking. The first thing Madame Shin said to Adaeze at their first formal dinner was, "Your Korean is very good, for a foreigner." Adaeze had smiled. "Thank you. My Mandarin is better." Junho had pressed his knee against hers under the table. She had taken it as support. She understood later it was a warning. Madame Shin, Junho's mother, 70 years old, spine like a steel rod, love language, control, had built the Shin family's reputation from the rubble of her late husband's legal troubles. She had held the family together through scandal, through debt, through years when the name Shin meant shame instead of power. She was proud of what she had rebuilt, and she was very, very clear about what that rebuilding required. Legacy, tradition, continuity. Our children, Madame Shin said one evening, 3 months into the marriage, when Adaeze was in the kitchen and Junho was not yet home. Carry this family's identity. Do you understand what I mean? Adaeze set down the glass she was holding. Say what you mean, Madame Shin. The old woman looked at her directly. I mean that a Shin child must look like a Shin child, for the family's future, for continuity. Adaeze said nothing for 7 full seconds. Then, I'll keep that in mind. She did not tell Junho that night, or the night after. She filed it in the part of herself where she kept things that required patience instead of reaction. But things began to shift. Junho's phone started going face down on the dinner table. Not always, just sometimes. But the times multiplied. He started working later than he needed to. He started defending her less when his mother's comments came, letting them pass over the dinner table like weather, like there was nothing to address. He chose a board meeting over Nari's school recital in April. He was 20 minutes late to their anniversary dinner in June and spent 40 of those minutes on his phone at the table. Small things, individually explainable, together a language. But Adaeze was not sitting still. While her marriage quietly dimmed, her professional life blazed. She had restructured Junho's import holdings and increased their profit margin by 31% in 18 months. She had negotiated a logistics corridor deal with 3 East African governments that the Shin Group's rivals had been chasing for 6 years. She sat in boardrooms where men twice her age tried to talk over her, and she let them finish, and then she dismantled their positions so cleanly that they left the table looking like they'd survived something. She spoke Korean, Igbo, Yoruba, English, and enough Mandarin to close a deal in Beijing without a translator. She was photographed for Forbes Korea. A journalist called her the quiet revolution inside the Shin Empire. Junho showed her the article on a Saturday morning. He looked proud. She thought, this is still in there. The man I married is still in there. She was right. He was. Just buried under something heavier than either of them had named. The scarf was cream-colored with small embroidered roses. It was not hers. She found it folded in the breast pocket of the jacket he'd worn to his Busan trip. She stood in their bedroom, with it in her hand for a very long time. She pressed it flat against the bed, picked it up again, set it down. Then she called him. He answered on the second ring. Hey, come home, she said. quiet, perfectly level. He knew from her voice. There was a pause. Adaeze, come home, Junho? When he walked in, she was sitting at the dining table. No drama, no broken things, no tears. The scarf was on the table between them. He looked at it and said nothing. How long? She asked. Adaeze. How long? He sat down across from her. He could not look at her directly. 8 months. She nodded slowly, like she was processing data, like her chest wasn't collapsing. I defended you, she said. In rooms where they made it very clear that I did not belong. I learned your language, I learned your customs, I learned how to be the wife your world required without losing who I was. Her voice was steady, still. I built your name while they erased mine. Junho's jaw worked. His eyes were wet. I know. Do you? Adaeze. Who is she? Silence. She waited. Her name is Park Seoyeon, he said. Adaeze nodded again. She stood up. She picked up the scarf and placed it back in his jacket pocket. She straightened her dress. I'm going to check on Nari, she said, and she walked out of the room, completely composed, completely destroyed, completely decided. The affair was not random. It had not started as weakness. That was the thing she discovered 3 weeks later, sitting in the office of the sharpest attorney in Seoul, a woman named Kim Jisoo, who handled exactly the kind of case that could never appear in public. Records. The affair had been encouraged, arranged almost. Madame Shin had known Seoyeon's family for 20 years. The introduction had not been accidental, and the pregnancy, carefully timed, carefully announced, had been the final piece of a plan that had been forming since the day Junho brought home a woman from Lagos who was too smart, too independent, and too unwilling to disappear into the Shin family's idea of what a Shin wife should be. They had not broken the marriage, they had scheduled its ending. They didn't just betray her, they planned it, and they had no idea that while they were planning, she already knew. At this point, would you have walked out quietly, or would you have destroyed everything in sight? Comment your answer below and share this video right now, because trust me, the next part is where everything flips, like the video if you're feeling everything she's feeling right now. The conspiracy. Adaeze did not cry. Not in the attorney's office, not in her car after, not at home, not in the shower, not in those long 3 a.m. hours when the house was silent and Nari slept and the other side of the bed was cold. She worked instead. She pulled contracts, old ones, the ones signed in the early days of the marriage when Junho had trusted her completely and had put her name on documents because she understood the legal architecture better than any lawyer he employed. She pulled registration papers. She pulled the articles of incorporation for 7 of the Shin Empire's subsidiary companies, companies that controlled the logistics routes, the port agreements, the East African corridor that she had personally negotiated. She sat with her laptop and a glass of water and she read for 6 hours straight. And then she called Kim Jisoo back. The Northern Port Distribution Network, she said. Who is the registered owner? She could hear Kim Jisoo typing. A pause. It's registered under... Oh. Another pause. Longer. It's registered under Adaeze Okafor. Not Okafor-Shin. Okafor. Because I never changed that one, Adaeze said. Because he asked me to register it during a board trip to Nairobi, and we used my Nigerian business documents, and I was too angry at him about something else that week to remember to update the name afterwards. Adaeze. Kim Jisoo's voice shifted. Do you understand what this means? Tell me what else. More typing, more silence. Then, the East African Corridor Agreements, the Mombasa Terminal Lease, the Accra Logistics Facility, a long exhale. All of these are tied to the Northern Port Network as the parent entity, which means they all belong to me, Adaeze said. Yes, even in divorce, especially in divorce. Kim Jisoo's voice had the careful flatness of someone managing their own shock. Adaeze, the Shin Empire's entire international expansion strategy is built on infrastructure that legally belongs to you personally. If this goes to court. It won't go to court, Adaeze said. Not yet. She closed her laptop. She looked out the window at Seoul at night. All those lights, all those lives, all that power concentrated in a city that had never fully believed she belonged in it. "I'm not ready," she said. "I need more." She got more. A journalist named O'Meara had been trying to get an interview with Adaeze for 2 years. She was the kind of reporter who wore blazers and never smiled in her byline photo, and had a reputation for printing things that powerful people spent millions of dollars trying to suppress. She had texted 3 times in the last year. Adaeze had not responded. She called her on a Wednesday afternoon. "I'm not ready to talk," Adaeze said when Mirai answered, "but I want to meet." They met in a coffee shop in Mapo, far from the Shin family's usual geography. Mirai arrived with no recorder, no notebook, nothing except her sharp eyes and a coffee order she'd placed before Adaeze arrived. "I've been following this family for 4 years, Mirai said. "I have material. I've just been missing the piece that makes it actionable." "What kind of material?" "Corruption, bribery, connections to 2 politicians who were supposed to be unconnected to private capital." Mirai tilted her head. "And rumors about the gala announcement before it was made." Adaeze's eyes didn't move. "How long have you known about the gala?" 3 days before it happened." Adaeze picked up her coffee cup, set it down without drinking. "I'm not ready," she said again. "I know." Mirai held her gaze. "But you will be." Back at the Shin estate, the gala announcement was already viral. Clips of Junho introducing Seoyeon cycled across every entertainment news platform. Comment sections burned. Twitter split into camps. Those who called it a disgrace, and those who called it a practical decision for a powerful family's future. And buried in the middle of it all, going quietly viral on its own, a 4-second clip of Adaeze walking out. Back straight, chin level. One hand on her daughter, heels on marble, the caption someone had written. She said absolutely nothing, and somehow it was the loudest thing in that room. 4 million views in 36 hours. The Shin family's PR team issued 3 statements trying to control the narrative. Madam Shin gave a short interview where she spoke about the complexity of modern family arrangements and what's best for the family's future. Junho said nothing publicly. Adaeze said nothing publicly either. She was too busy. She met with Kim Ji-soo twice more. She flew quietly to Nairobi under a different itinerary and spent 4 days in meetings with partners who were loyal to her specifically, who had signed with the Shin Empire because of her name, because of the relationship she had built. She came back with signed letters of intent that redirected 3 major contracts to a company that did not yet exist. She registered it on a Friday morning, 11 minutes before her afternoon tea with Nari's school teacher. The company name was Adaeze Limited. She registered the company, she locked the roots, she had the legal infrastructure, the business allies, and a journalist with 4 years of research waiting for her signal. Junho had replaced her in public. What he didn't know was that she had already replaced him in every document that mattered. The revenge begins. She did not call it revenge, she called it realignment. The first piece dropped on a Monday. A business analysis piece in the Korea Economic Daily, not a tabloid, not a gossip site, a respected financial publication, under the byline of a senior analyst. The headline read, "Shin Group's International Holdings, a Structural Question." It didn't accuse, it simply asked questions. Very specific, very well-researched questions about the ownership structure of the Northern Port Distribution Network and whether the Shin Group's claimed ownership of several international infrastructure agreements was legally accurate given the registered ownership documents on file with both Korean and African regulatory bodies. By 11 a.m., the Shin Group's share price had dipped 4%. By 2 p.m., 2 institutional investors had placed their positions under review. By 5 p.m., Junho's chief of staff had called Kim Ji-soo's office 3 times. Kim Ji-soo did not return the calls. Junho called Adaeze directly that evening. She let it ring. He called again. She answered the 3rd time, sounding unhurried, like she'd been interrupted from something comfortable. "What did you do?" His voice was tight, controlled, but underneath it she could hear something new, something she had never heard in 9 years of knowing him. He was scared. "I didn't do anything," she said pleasantly. "Regulatory documents are public record, Junho. Anyone can read them." "Adaeze, how is Seoyeon?" A beat of silence, then, "Don't do this." "I'm not doing anything." She paused. "Good night." She hung up. The second piece came 4 days later. This one was not subtle. Oh, Mirai had given her signal. The article ran in 3 outlets simultaneously, 2 Korean investigative platforms and 1 international financial news service. It detailed, with documentation, the relationship between the Shin Group and 2 government officials who had awarded the group exclusive port access in 2019. It showed email chains, bank transfer records, a recorded phone conversation that had been legally obtained. The title, Power, Money and the Port, How the Shin Empire Bought Its Expansion. By morning, it was the top story in every Korean financial publication. By afternoon, 2 government officials had issued panicked denials. By evening, the National Assembly had opened an inquiry. Junho's world didn't crack, it shattered. The board convened an emergency meeting. Investors pulled out in tranches. 3 business partners in Japan released statements distancing themselves. The PR team worked through the night and produced nothing useful because there was nothing useful to produce. Every fact in the article was accurate. Junho's nights became a geography of damage control, drinking more than he should, sleeping barely at all. His mother called him 7 times a day, her voice growing more ragged with each call, cycling between fury and desperation, and the occasional cruelty that surfaces in people when they are cornered. "You did this," she told him in their 4th call that week. "You brought her in. I told you. I told you from the beginning that woman would bring this family down." Junho held the phone away from his ear and looked out the window at the city that was, for the first time in his life, looking back at him like a stranger. He showed up at Adaeze's door at 11 p.m. on a Thursday. She hadn't changed the locks. She hadn't needed to. He hadn't been back. He stood in the doorway and he looked, for the first time in 9 years, like a man who did not know what to do next. She looked at him from the other side of the living room. She did not move toward him. "Come in or don't," she said quietly. "It's cold." He came in, sat on the couch, didn't speak for a while. She poured him water and set it on the table in front of him and sat across from him in the chair, the way she always had, present but with distance, the old geometry of their difficult conversations. "I loved you," he said finally. She let that sit in the room for a moment. "I know," she said. "I don't know how this happened." His voice broke slightly. "I don't know when I let them, when I stopped. When you stopped choosing me." He looked up. His eyes were red. "Yes. You started very slowly," she said. "That's the thing about it, Junho. If you had stopped all at once, I would have known. But it was so slow. 1 degree at a time. Phone down, dinner cancelled, defense withheld. By the time I understood what was happening, you were already somewhere else entirely." He put his face in his hands. "I'm sorry," he said, and it came out broken, raw, the way apologies do when they arrive years too late, and the person who needed them is already somewhere you cannot reach. She looked at him with something that was not quite pity and not quite love and not quite anger, something older and sadder than all 3. "Not enough," she said gently. "You loved me? Not enough to protect me?" He didn't respond. There was nothing to respond to. She let him sit there for 20 minutes. She made tea, set a cup beside him, and then, quietly, she said, "You need to go, Junho." He went. She stood at the window after he left and watched his car until the headlights disappeared around the corner. Then she sat down and breathed, just breathed. She allowed herself 4 minutes of that. Then she opened her laptop. The 3rd attack was already scheduled. What none of them had counted on, not Junho, not Madame Shin, not the board, not the lawyers, was the fourth person in this story who had been wronged. Park Se-yeon was 27 years old and 7 months pregnant, and she had believed, sincerely, genuinely believed, that Junho was going to choose her. The family had told her so. Madame Shin had courted her, invited her to family dinners, treated her with the warmth that had been specifically and visibly withheld from Adaeze. She had been chosen. She was the plan. But plans, when they become public and begin to cost money, get revised. And when Se-yeon overheard Junho on a call with his lawyers talking about a strategic regrouping and minimizing liability from the Se-yeon matter, she understood slowly and then all at once that she was not the chosen one. She was the instrument. She sat with that knowledge for 3 days, and then she found Adaze's number. Subscribe right now, because what Se-yeon does next changes everything. This is the moment the whole story turns. Hit the like button if you're not ready for this to end, and share this video because someone you know needs to see this today. Women, Alliance, and the final collapse. The call came at 7:14 a.m. Adaeze was on her second coffee, reviewing a contract amendment. Nari still asleep down the hall. An unknown number, Korean prefix. She almost didn't answer. Adaeze Okafor. Not a question. Adaeze went still. Yes. This is Park Se-yeon. A pause. I know you have no reason to listen to me. I know what I look like to you. I know what I am to you. But I need to speak to you. Adaeze set her coffee down very carefully. Go ahead. Not on the phone. Se-yeon's voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it. Not guilt, exactly. More like the voice of someone who has just understood something terrible and needs to say it out loud to make it real. Please. They met in a cafe near Hongdae at 10 a.m. Adaeze arrived first. She chose a table in the back corner, both exits visible. Old habit. Se-yeon walked in 7 minutes later, and Adaeze, who had expected to feel nothing but ice when she saw her, felt something shift unexpectedly when the woman sat down, because Se-yeon looked exhausted, not glamorous, not triumphant. Exhausted and young and frightened and very, very pregnant. I was told, Se-yeon said, not meeting her eyes yet, that you had already decided to leave. That the marriage was over and Junho was alone and trying to find a way forward. I was told that for 8 months before I understood that was not. She stopped, swallowed. That was not true. Adaeze said nothing. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Se-yeon continued. I don't think I'd forgive me. I just... She finally looked up. Did you know, before the gala, that you existed? Yes. Adaeze folded her hands on the table. That you were pregnant. Not until that night. Se-yeon nodded slowly. Madame Shin told me the gala was a formality, that it was already settled. Her jaw tightened. And then, last week, I heard him on a call with his lawyers, and they were talking about how to manage the situation with me, about paying me off, about a settlement that would make me disappear quietly. Adaeze felt something move across her face, not satisfaction. Something closer to recognition. They used you, Adaeze said. Yes. Se-yeon's voice was very quiet. The same way they used you, just differently. Adaeze looked at her for a long moment. Then she reached across the table, not to hold her hand, just to slide a business card across. Call Kim Jisoo, she said. She's the best family attorney in Seoul. Tell her I sent you. She'll make sure you and your child are protected regardless of what Junho decides to do next. Se-yeon stared at the card, then at Adaeze. Why? She asked. Why would you help me? Adaeze picked up her coffee. Because you didn't create this. You were placed inside it. She paused. And your child is completely innocent. Se-yeon pressed her lips together. Her eyes filled. I'm sorry, she said. I'm so sorry. Adaeze nodded once. That was enough. She didn't need more than that. 3 days after that meeting, Oh Mirai published the third piece. This one contained screenshots of internal Shin family messages, messages that had been forwarded from a source Mirai did not name, that showed in explicit detail the plan to phase out Adaeze, engineer a separation on the family's terms, and replace her with a woman whose ethnic background was considered more compatible with the Shin family's public image. The messages included Madame Shin's voice note. The African woman has served her purpose. She built the roots. Now we take the roads and return to our own. The internet caught fire, trending on every platform in Korea and then internationally. The words Shin Empire, racism, and Adaeze appearing together in millions of search queries. News outlets from Lagos to London to Los Angeles picking up the story. Comment sections in 5 languages. Madame Shin, for the first time in 40 years, was photographed looking afraid. The board convened again. This time the tone was different. This time there were lawyers in the room who were talking about liability, about international business relationships, about the East African corridor that the Shin group needed and had suddenly, very publicly, been reminded did not belong to them. A board member named Choi Dongwon, a man who had sat on that board for 11 years and had watched Adaeze Okafor-Shin negotiate deals that tripled their international footprint, put his pen down on the table and said very quietly, "We need to talk about what we stand to lose if this woman takes her infrastructure and leaves." It took 4 hours. At the end of those 4 hours, the board voted to remove Shin Junho as executive director pending investigation. He was informed by text from his own company's legal department. He read it standing in the kitchen of his apartment, alone, at 9:47 p.m. He put his phone face down on the counter. He stood there, and the silence that surrounded him was the kind that only exists when absolutely everything has gone. Downstairs in the car park, 3 floors below him, his mother sat in the back of her car and did not speak for 40 minutes. Her driver did not ask her where she wanted to go. She had built that empire from nothing. She had sacrificed things for it that she had never named out loud. She had told herself that every hard decision was for the family, for the legacy, for the name. And now the name was trending worldwide as a story about racism and betrayal and the humiliation of the woman who had built their international future with her bare hands. She had wanted her son to have everything. She had not accounted for what it would cost. She broke the empire. But the most extraordinary thing about Adaeze Okafor was that she did not stop at breaking it. She built something else entirely, and what she built nobody could take.
And that is the story of Adaeze Okafor, the woman they humiliated publicly and lost privately. If this story moved you, like this video right now, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe if you aren't already, because we tell stories like this every single week. And tell me in the comments, what was the moment you knew she had already won? Was it when she walked out of the ballroom? When she registered the company? Or was it when she gave Seoyeon Kim Jisoo's number? Drop it below. I want to know. She did not destroy the empire. She simply stopped holding it together, and it fell.